Welcome, folks, to your local sociological news report. Today's topic is the socioeconomic levels of gender and race on psychological health disorders. For the longest time, depression has been unacknowledged from the substantial concerns of society. How mental health becomes irrelevant to the social norms and conditions of society is entirely dependent on sociological sources from the disease. In 2014, Lefman have concluded that stress associated with depression is often referred from a distressing event and response to events. In this case, sociological data analysis conducted by Kim in 2013 have found the prevalence of major depressive disorder to be 16.9% nationwide. On the other hand, estimates made by other social data analysts, Kristen Haslett, reported in 2014 that approximately 46.2 million people, about 15.1% in the United States, have lived below the poverty line. From these two data analyses, there is a strong depiction and correlation between poverty and major depressive disorder, which sets nearly 1 out of 5 Americans at this relatively indicated stage. As of today's society, there's been many research findings in the relationship between depression and gender roles, as particularly emphasized by the status of women. In the United States, Kristen and Haslett in 2013 have found a vast disproportion of female Americans who perceived below the poverty line, such that poor women not only continually deal with basic economic stresses, such as obtaining food and shelter, but they also face a wide array of physical and psychological stressors. To comprehend these psychosocial factors, the gender stresses behind women have been depicted by the attributions of poverty towards their mental health and beliefs in social upward mobility. In particular, women's up to gender roles by sociologist Kristen Haslett. A community sample of 66 low-income mothers from the Midwestern United States have found these women more likely to attribute the poverty to issues relating to having children, their romantic relationships, and their structural government blame. These sociologists have constructed this data to indicate a microscopic perspective in examining the social conditions of women assimilated by the low socioeconomic standing. As a result of the study, conclusions have led to the following: low-income mothers contributing to their poverty from having children and encountering romantic relationship issues. However, a counter result has found again by Kristen Haslett that attributions to children and romantic relationships were also related to perceived upward mobility in the future. Overall, the precise relationship between women's role and their mental health is directly related to the socioeconomic statuses they were associated with. While the present psychosocial matter still persists, financially impaired women with children does serve the low socioeconomic class, just as with prevalent indication for social mobility in the United States. Engendered stressors, sociological research conducted by D in 2005 have shown that males and females perceive mental health disorders rather differently as opposed to their similar aspects of the disease. In this particular study, males and females have responded, exposed, and become vulnerable to different types of stresses. These implications revealed by D have shown that vulnerability to these stresses have also varied across gender, with females generally expressing greater vulnerability to communal stresses in form of depression, while males expressing greater vulnerability to adjacent stresses in form of law violation. From the matter, it is extensively researched by mental health analysts that females tend to be more likely to internalize problems in form of psychological stress than what males would encounter. On the other hand, of the study, D found males are more likely than females to externalize the problems through antisocial and law-violating behaviors. From this conducted research, it's evident to see a dichotomy between these two gender roles as a result of their social behavior, despite any articulation of their socioeconomic status. The scholarly article certifies the conditions of gender-related stressors and the psychosocial factors amongst females and males. For instance, D concluded that males and females appear to express their vulnerability to stress in gendered ways because depression is consistent with definitions of femininity, while law violation is considered with definitions of masculinity. And according to the sociological article, the differentiation between the two gender roles appear to be a customary norm of society in terms of psychological disorderly behavior. This prevailing analysis would also indicate an explanation as to why mental health disorders become heavily disregarded from the major concerns of society because of the prevailing gendered roles. The socioeconomic statuses of people, primarily those belonging to a lower class poverty, significantly boost the prevalence of higher rates of depressive disorders. And how that happens is because lower social class influence these mental disorders that has been conducted and founded by Lefman Combs Orm in 2014 on child poverty, where children who live in poverty have poor health and social outcomes, including higher rates of morbidity and chronic diseases, reduced school achievement, and more emotionally behavioral problems. These social configurations outline how the disadvantages derive from low socioeconomic classes, which attribute the commonality of psychological health diseases. Another research article by Goodman, Slap, and Hong in 2013 on mental health was primarily aimed at the targets of obesity and how industrialized countries of lower socioeconomic status have been clearly linked to poor health. This research reveals that industrialized and unindustrialized countries are actually irrelevant in a differentiating society that's free of mental health, because almost every country has a capitalistic social hierarchy where there's always going to be a poor social class. Lastly, Palmer and Lever in 2007 have found importance to acknowledge the variables behind socioeconomic status, because it has been reported in literature that the socioeconomic level of subjects often does not correspond to their class identification, more rather of the latter, that it is a better predictor of physical and psychological health variables, where these variables often include self-esteem, strategies of coping with stress, social support networks, center of control, depression, achievement, motivation, and subjective well-being, as well as the probability of experiencing social mobility upwardly. This research article would also suggest a significant degree of social inequality, because the disadvantages of low socioeconomic class tends to articulate the psychological social behavior. These gender-related stressors, racial disparities, and low socioeconomic classes all conclude to a sociological theory of cultural competency. This theory explores diverse cultural factors where issues regarding the interpersonal relationship between healthcare providers and patients include the cultural barriers of access to healthcare. Overall, the accommodation of mental health illnesses through a psychological perspective relies significantly on socio-cultural tailoring, effective interventions for ethnic minorities, and gendered populations who are in need of psychological assistance. This will certainly be more efficient in accommodating the prevailing increase of mental health illness rather than the standard treatment programs. The overwhelming indication of mental depressive disorders in the United States largely correlates with the assimilation of gender roles, precise social identification from the social inequality of financially poor and the racial disparities that derive from this lower spectrum of social class. And that wraps up my news report.